I thought that was the thumb rather than the
minute.
index.
You got to know which finger you're getting at all times, Rich.
I get different ones. I get different ones at different times. But thank you, John.
Anytime I can be of assistance.
First.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. I'll try again. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Tompkins County Industrial Development Agency as a special meeting for July 29th, 2024. And the first item of business is privilege of the floor. Is there anybody in the room who wishes to address? Yes. Is that Peter behind the mask? Did you want to read your comments or did you want to speak to us? Yeah, come on up. Yeah, please put them in the record for us. Yes.
Thanks. Hi, I was glad to see this report as a draft, and that I'm assuming that based on feedback from the board, Ms. McDaniel and the public will be receiving a more developed document. Rather than present you an exhaustive list of concerns, permit me to address 4, each of which I hope you'll consider significant enough to pursue in your discussion with Ms. Selsky. By doing so, before doing so, I just want to note, and I'm sorry there's a typo, how embarrassing, that Cornell has numerous experts on input-output models whose opinion you might also want to solicit. So my concerns are as follows. 1, was an assessment done of the costs of the developer's stated costs for the project, not just the costs of the capital, but the actual costs and whether they seem accurate, or I should say the actual projected costs and whether they seem accurate. This is what I expected would be reviewed when told we were getting an independent evaluation of the project. As a basis for a decision as significant as this, one should be arranged. It will require some nuance, of course, given the fluctuations in all kinds of costs over time. Number 2, in its current form, the reasonableness assessment takes an all the elements or none approach. It would be useful to see figures broken down for the types of projects and a greater range of options. An obvious example would be the market rate housing. As we've discussed many times, there's no need for market rate housing to receive a tax abatement or tax break, as some people call it, even in this project. Could we see what the numbers look like without that? And certainly a hotel would not need a 10-year tax break. That's generally the life of some hotels. Could we see what it looks like with just 5 or none at all? As an aside, I hope the board will take a project-by-project approach to tax breaks rather than providing a blank grant for the entire site. There's plenty here that's worthy of our support, but it should be given judiciously, not carte blanche. Number 3, and maybe most importantly, a couple of core assumptions in the review are clearly wrong. The most glaring is the assumption that all non-residential on-site employment will come from outside the county. I don't know where this idea came from, but even a quick look at this week's Tompkins Weekly makes it clear it's not quite accurate. In an article about the development, Southworks community outreach person Sarah Barden is quoted as saying, "I've been talking with some startups that are coming out of the incubators at Cornell who've outgrown the spaces on campus," which indicates some, at least, of the on-site work will come from the county. The author might also take a look at Cornell alum Rachel Weber's study of new office space in Chicago that shows that the most common occupant of new space tends to be local firms that relocate rather than firms outside the region. Although it would be great if we had some large firms like Emerson type firms say, yes, we want to move to this new facility. That would be great, right? B, similarly, I'm sure there are plenty of low to middle income residents in the county who would be pretty offended at the idea that only 5% of the house designed and priced for people at 80% AMI would be available to them. And yes, I realize the housing is available to everyone, but to expect that only 5% would be filled with county residents seems way off base, honestly. And again, I'd urge you to ask Ms. Selsky to reconsider this assumption. We have plenty of residents who would like new affordable housing in lieu of their present situation. Item 4, the input-output model has no cost to the local communities built in. Surely there must be a way to account for the extra teachers, facilities, supplies, buses, et cetera, the school district will have to bear to accommodate the anticipated extra students that invariably are attached to a project of this size. Similarly, where are the costs for fire, police, water, road maintenance, planning personnel, recycling and yard waste collection, et cetera? And what about the investment income or lower borrowing costs that would likely accrue to the taxing districts if the developers didn't receive a pilot or perhaps received a smaller one? Thank you. I wrote to Ms. Selsky and raised a couple of these questions, but received no reply. I'm sure she's been very busy, likely prepping for this meeting. Hopefully she'll have time to address them in this forum. As always, I'm happy to elaborate on any of these points and would also note that if a committee is formed to examine the abatements for Southworks, I'm happy to join if invited. It's a great project. And I'm going to leave because I remain immunocompromised, but I'll watch online to see it.
Okay. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. All right. One housekeeping item. I see that one of our members is on screen. Ann, do you fit within the policy to allow you to vote today?
I don't believe so, and I didn't think we were going to vote on anything.
Okay. All right. We're just receiving information. If it comes to that, all right, we'll deal with it then. But good to have you.
Thank you.
Let's keep going. Are there any additions to the agenda? I anticipate we're going to have an executive session at the end of the meeting, but we'll consider that at the time. Anything else? Okay. Let's move to our business, and our business is Southworks today. And let's start with the third-party consultant presentation. And I believe Heather?
So I'm going to introduce Rachel Selsky, who is the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at Camoin Associates. She is joining us via Zoom today. Welcome, Rachel.
Hi, great. Thank you so much for having me. Everyone can hear me okay? I'm wonderful. Well, it's good to see you all. Thank you so much for this opportunity. As Heather mentioned, I am Rachel Selsky. I have been with Camoin Associates for over 16 years. I'm currently Vice President, but over that period of time, I've done a lot of economic and fiscal impact studies for IDAs all across New York State, doing similar types of analysis, helping IDA boards consider the cost benefit of the financial assistance being offered to different projects. I've also worked with the New York State EDC, analyzing the economic impact of IDAs across the state. For this project, the IDA asked us to conduct two different studies. The first is an economic and fiscal benefit or fiscal impact analysis. And the second was a reasonableness assessment to compare the financial feasibility of the project under a number of different scenarios, including no pilot, the standard pilot, and a requested pilot. So we performed these analyses in conjunction. We worked closely with the Tompkins County IDA team to make sure we were understanding the proposed pilot scenarios, the project as well, and make sure that we were helping to answer the necessary questions. Would you like me to provide an overview of the two studies, or are there specific questions that I can answer at this time? What would be most helpful?
I think you're going to have lots of questions, but why don't, if you can do it briefly, let's get an overview.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the economic impact, the first piece was understanding the temporary construction costs and the temporary construction impacts and how that would impact Tompkins County. And so we made some assumptions regarding the percent of the total costs that were presented in the application by the applicant of how much would be sourced from the county. We did this through a number of different ways. We looked at it from different assumptions, including what's currently available within the county to serve construction type supply chain needs, as well as input from the applicant about what they're intending to use for local goods and services. So our analysis of the temporary construction impact resulted in over nearly 61 million in new earnings in Tompkins County and over 1,000 jobs in Tompkins County temporarily during the period of construction. So over that long phased-in construction process, that would be the increase in jobs. We then looked at more of the ongoing impacts during operations. So that would come from a number of different sources. Certainly the households would bring discretionary spending by adding more housing to the area. You are allowing more people to live locally. And so we did an analysis to estimate the percent of the units that would be able to be filled from households that would come from outside of the area, based on an understanding of the current supply and demand of units at those different price points. So an understanding of the spending habits of those households results in an economic impact as they're able to spend a portion of their goods, those different spending baskets within Tompkins County. So that was our impact of the households. We also had an impact of on-site operations. So we used information that was provided by the applicant in their application regarding total on-site employment expected upon completion. And we're able to use an understanding of what types of jobs would be created on site to do a full economic impact analysis of those on-site jobs. In total, the ongoing annual operations impact on Tompkins County would be over 137 million in new earnings and over 2,000 jobs. That includes both the direct on-site jobs, but also the multiplier effect throughout the economy as there's business-to-business spending as well as employee-to-business spending. So it includes those three main categories: the direct on-site activity, the indirect, which is business-to-business spending, and the induced impact, which is the employee to business spending as they're spending their earnings locally within Tompkins County. So that's the economic impact. The fiscal impact compares what the property.
Hold on one second, Rachel.
Property tax.
Hold on. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Can we ask questions on the first document that we just went through rather than skip into the reasonableness?
Well, she's still on the first document because
Okay.
it's economic and fiscal.
Okay.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that we could go one document
Yeah.
at a time.
As I said, I think we're going to have lots of questions.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Sure.
But why don't you finish talking about the fiscal elements?
Sorry.
It's okay.
Yep, no problem. So then in the fiscal impact, I compared what the current property tax of the parcel, what it's currently generating, a total of about $2.5 million. I compare that to what the pilot payment under the requested scenario would be generating over 20 years of about 46.7 million. And then I compare that to what the property tax would be with the project and with no pilot, and that would be about $110 million total over that period of time, so that we can understand what's the benefit of the project of the pilot. So comparing no project to the pilot, the municipalities would earn about $44 million more in property tax benefit over that period of 20 years. And then also looking at what is the benefit to the applicant. So what they would otherwise pay if the project were to occur, but no pilot, compared to the pilot payment. So that's about 63 million in abated taxes. So that provides the comparison there. Understanding that without financial assistance in the form of a pilot, and in working with the IDA is the understanding that without the assistance that the project would not occur. And so this is really just to provide kind of that comparison between the pilot being requested and what otherwise would be generated with the project, what the project would pay otherwise. We also list out the other exemptions that the project would be eligible for, as well as some estimates on the sales tax revenue that would occur as the earnings of the construction workers and the construction related impacts are spent locally, as well as the ongoing operations. The earnings are spent locally, creating sales tax revenue for the county. Happy to take questions.
Okay, why don't we do that? And if I could ask my colleagues on the IDA, when you have a question, if you've got a page number, so we can all catch up with where you're at. Jeff, you have a question?
Yeah. So thanks very much. I'd like to go to table 4, kind of understanding the net new households. And then obviously I know in attachment B, you've given some more background on that. So I just want to kind of understand how the percentages were come about and then understand. So you're saying 51% are net new, which I'm interpreting that that's 51% of, so new people are going to be coming into the community. So the remaining 49% is going to be relocating within the community. So what would happen to that 49% of those houses that are relocating within the county? Are they moving from an apartment to this place, or kind of what's the analysis say on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk a bit more about that. So what we do is we look at the current supply of housing at different price points within both Tompkins County, but also a larger 45 kind of minute drive time to understand kind of that's more of the market where people might be looking to locate within the project. And so our analysis helps us to identify how much housing is available for those different price points or those different household income levels. And so our analysis found that there was when looking at what is available within the market, within those 2 drive times, 40% of the market rate units would be net new, and 95% would be net new on the affordable front. So that indicates to me that there is limited affordable units that within Tompkins County, and so any new units would be creating, new affordable units would be creating something that does not otherwise exist within the market. And when looking at those numbers, you can assume that there is some relocation from those other units that are within Tompkins County, kind of moving from an existing property into this new development, and that there would be that churn. So eventually those units, someone move into that unit, and based on what is existing within the region for housing at those different price points, there would at some point be people coming in from outside of the area to fill those units. There would be a combination of both moving from within the county, but also filling from outside of the county.
That answer your question, Jeff?
What about the market rate units, right? If 40% of those are being filled from outside the county, what happens to the other units elsewhere in the market that are being essentially displaced, I think was part of your question, right?
So like the 60% that are coming from within the county?
Yeah.
Right.
So at some point, like there will continue to be that churn of someone moving into those units. And at some point down the road, there'll be units that may become obsolete or they don't end up getting filled as people continue to move, I don't want to say up, but into different units within the area. And so based on what's available, we would expect about 60% of those units to be filled by local county residents.
So I think, sorry, just to follow up. So I think what I heard is the 49% could eventually get used or filled by out-of-county residents at some point, but it's into the future.
Yep.
So then for you, so in this study, you were conservative in saying, look, we're only going to say 51% is really being utilized, and that 49% may get filled by out-of-county residents at some point, but we're not going to put it into our economic study because it's just so far into the future, we just don't know, right? So it's another,
Yes.
It's more of a conservative estimate, you're saying then?
Yeah, we look at, the actual net new could be larger, but we do understand in the current market as it exists right now with the data available to us, this is what we would assume.
Okay. Hold on, John. Deborah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that disturbed me about this assessment that 95% of those affordable units would be filled by new people moving in from out of the county is my familiarity with the county's housing snapshot, which I don't know if you've seen. As of 2022, over half of the renters in Tompkins County were housing cost burdened, i.e. they were paying more than 30% of their income for housing, and 38% were severely housing cost burdened, i.e. they were paying more than 50% of their income for housing. That suggests to me that a lot of people locally would be very interested in this workforce housing that's part of this project, and I'm wondering why they weren't accounted for in your 95% out of county.
That's a great question. So the analysis is assuming two things. One, that the individuals would come from out of the county, and the second part of it is that otherwise they couldn't find something that they would be able to afford. And so those individuals that are highly cost burdened, they may at some point, if otherwise for this project or other affordable housing projects within the region, they may need to locate elsewhere. They may need to move out of the area to find appropriate housing or affordable housing for them. And so it does also consider those individuals, as well as kind of that, since the demand is so great for affordable units, it is also that individuals might be coming into the area, those individuals who are currently in the area relocate to the project. And then if their units are affordable, may be filled by individuals who would be looking for that more affordable type unit pretty quickly because the demand is so high.
Okay. John.
So if I'm understanding correctly, you're assuming that basically like we've got within the market rate category, sort of 278 of these units will be filled, of the 732 will be filled by people who are coming in from out of the county. Essentially, this is like unmet demand that exists. The balance, whatever that is, 500 or 400 and some odd units, are essentially going to create filtering within the rest of the housing market, right? I mean, you're essentially saying like people are living in units right now that are obsolete that will be replaced by these units, which should theoretically create some vacancy, which should theoretically create some downward pricing pressure. Is that an accurate characterization of what you're saying about specifically the market rate portion?
Yes, increasing supply would tend to have that result as you described it.
And you actually think this is, I mean, I think there's a lot of debate locally about how much supply increase is necessary in order to actually create a downward pattern on pricing pressure. My personal estimation is that this is nowhere near enough. I'm curious, sort of like, it seems like you think that specifically at the market rate level, this is more than enough to actually make a meaningful difference. Is that accurate? And can you help us understand where you got that?
Full housing price analysis or needs assessment on Tompkins County. So I wouldn't really feel comfortable making that judgment call at this point.
Okay, Deborah.
That's okay.
All right. I guess I'll jump in. I have the same questions about the percentages, but I don't have any doubt we need more housing and we need more affordable housing. So I think that element is okay from my standpoint. I did have some other questions, so I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in. And I'll just go on page, well, let's see, about the study, page 2. The input-output model developed by Lightcast, and our visitor had kind of the same question. It seems like it's sort of a black box, that you input information and it provides estimates. How is that done? And, in 2 minutes or less. Sorry.
Yes, so we use an input-output model similar to different programs like InPlan, RIMS. There are different of these input-output models where they take into consideration the existing supply chain industries that are available within the geography selected based on tax returns, corporate filings, a whole host of data points that they are able to estimate how an increase in a certain industry would have a ripple effect in supporting industries in the supply chain. So they, based on all the data that they have an understanding of within Tompkins County, what supply chain industries are available to serve the industry that has changed, and what isn't available, and therefore what is the amount that would leak out that would create where the money would no longer be circulating within the local economy. And it creates an input-output multiplier that is able to document how an increase in a certain industry or activity or project has the ripple effect throughout the economy within the local geography that's being studied.
Okay, is there a place an IDA member could go to learn about the different input-output models if we wanted to do that, and to get a sense of which are more conservative or optimistic?
Yeah, I can look into that and certainly get some more information back to Heather on that.
Okay.
That's no problem.
Then I had a question on page 3. You've got construction costs that you're estimating, and we've been hearing the number 588, and you seem to be using a different number. And I was wondering, how did you arrive at your numbers?
Yes, so I believe the difference, I don't have the application up right in front of me. Mine only includes the hard cost of construction. It does not include any purchasing of land or financing costs. I would have to pull up the application to remind myself, but that's probably the difference.
Yeah.
Okay, it seems like there's a pretty big spread between the numbers you used and theirs, but okay. But it also it appears that you're assuming that it all gets built, and it gets built in the near term because you're using a 20-year schedule. Is that what you did? Because this seems to be different than the phased approach that we've seen in the application.
Yeah, so my analysis is, yes, it's all over the period of construction. This is the impact that it will have at different points, understanding that it will be phased. If a detailed breakdown of the costs of the different phases could be provided, I would be happy to run a kind of a broken down phased analysis. But I did, over the life of the project, this construction impact on Tompkins County would result in this total impact. Yes, that is correct. That is how I did it.
Okay, and just, I certainly have some concerns, and I think I'm not alone on the IDA in trying to figure out how we approve projects that may not start for up to 15 years from now. And all of the assumptions we have to make regarding interest rates, construction costs, labor supply, you have not taken that into account here as I read it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Hey,
Jeff?
Rich, just wanted to add to your comment about the total costs, or just looking at the application, the soft costs and the acquisition costs were about $170 million. So in the application, so that may account for kind of the differences of what we were thinking the total cost would be.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Deborah?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up a little bit on one of Mr. Wissaker's comments, something that I frankly hadn't even thought of when I was analyzing this, which was his question about whether there was any way to account for the extra costs that the construction process and the addition of new residents and businesses to the community would incur for the taxing jurisdictions. I'm not sure there's any way for you to do that, Rachel, but I think that we as an IDA board need to be cognizant of the fact that this extra revenue is not just going to be gravy. There are going to be extra expenses and costs associated with it.
So there are ways to do that. That was not part of the scope of work that we were hired to do here, but there are ways certainly to estimate that.
Okay, thank you. Ann, I see you, but Duck had his hand up, so I'll go to Duck and then to Ann.
On that point, though, a lot of the things that are listed are things that residents pay for kind of ad hoc, like water, sewer, trash collection. But yeah, that still would be useful. I don't want to fixate too much on the percentages because I don't think it ultimately matters that much, but I agree that 5% seems really odd, and I can't prove it. I just have kind of anecdotal evidence that when a new building opens up, you meet with residents, they've relocated from older housing or other parts of the county, and it seems, again, admittedly only anecdotally, but it seems significantly higher than 5%. But again, I don't think it's super important. The thing I kind of want to, and I might be wrong, but Mr. Wissaker's email seems to imply that we'd be capping the number of local residents at 5%, and I just want to make it super clear that there's in no way is that's an analysis, an estimate from the consultant, and we would never consider, nor do we have the ability really to cap that number.
Okay, Ann.
Thank you. Thank you for this. Rachel, did you look at the Tompkins County housing snapshot?
I did not as part of this analysis. Happy to take another look and talk through it with the team if that would be helpful for the analysis.
Okay.
Because that, personally, I would like that because that's, we've done analysis of over the past few years of what the housing needs are and what our targets are, you know, especially what income levels that we're needing and age groups.
Yeah.
Just following up on some things that were mentioned regarding percentage of folks that might be moving into this housing. So I'll just stick for right this second with the affordable housing. So I think it does matter greatly whether it's 5% or 50% or 75% of folks, because when we go back to the analysis and the projected figures of the spending, and then that the residents would have here locally, and then the indirect jobs that would produce, if a much larger portion are already living here, that affects these numbers greatly. So I don't know. I guess I just say that I think it is really important if we can come up with some better what I think is maybe a more accurate analysis.
Yep.
And the market rate housing too, is that something that you looked at as far as vacancy rates and do we, you know, as far as what's the need for the market rate housing?
Yes, we incorporated the vacancy rate into the analysis, as well as the percent of households that are owner versus renter. We took into a number of different data points into consideration. Happy to elaborate more on that in a future update if that feels helpful.
Okay, John.
Yeah, I actually think that these numbers, these percentages actually are profoundly important. But I think perhaps the question is like sort of like what do we actually mean by 95% new households? And I think perhaps you know, we're talking about 95% of the total count of these households somewhere in the county will be households that are new to the county, not necessarily within this project. So to Duck's point, like probably a lot of these people actually will relocate from other housing elsewhere in the county. They might be at their 50% of their income in some apartment they can't afford somewhere else, and they're moving into an apartment that they now can afford within the county, right? I know that the county's housing needs assessment, I don't know if I have the most up-to-date numbers on this, we have something like 15,000 daily in commuters that work in the county and live outside the county, and when surveyed, something like 60% of those people said that they would move to Tompkins County if only they could find housing here that they could afford. And it's like, here it is, right? So in my mind, I actually don't think the 95% number is necessarily a bad thing. It's important, I think, perhaps to sort of characterize, like, you know, we're not talking about 95% of these specific housing units will be people that don't live in the county right now. We're saying 95% of this capacity is net new capacity that's going to create something that doesn't exist in our market today, which is exactly the thing we're really trying to do. If I actually understand this analysis correctly, that's really what we're saying. And further, these 40% or 60% of units that aren't net new capacity at the market rate should have a meaningful impact on pricing there. So I think that I would encourage my colleagues to think about it perhaps in that reference frame rather than latching on to like, well, only 5% of these are going to be for people who are local. That's not really, I think, perhaps quite what I'm seeing in these numbers.
Okay, Deborah.
To that point, John, you may well be right. I mean, the net effect of the addition of these units is going to have a, spread across the community, and perhaps one of the positive impacts will be an increase in the county's vacancy rate, which is notoriously historically low. But that said, I'm more comfortable making a decision as a member of this board on information that I consider more accurate than this 95%.
Certainly, from my standpoint, I'm comfortable that there's need for housing. This project would do great things.
I don't think there's any doubt that this project will have a lot of beneficial impacts on our community. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And perhaps we shouldn't be putting quite so much emphasis on quantifying what those are going to be.
Yeah. Okay. Further questions on the economic and fiscal report? Give you a moment. Okay. Rachel, why don't you introduce us to the reasonability analysis, please?
Sure.
Assessment.
Yeah, happy to.
Yeah.
So the reasonableness assessment is a tool that we have been using with other IDAs around New York State as they really start to wrestle with the idea of how much public assistance should we be providing to developers when they are considering the assistance. Really trying to make sure that good use of public resources are being maintained. You're not offering too generous of a incentive package to developers. Not just taking their word for it. So other IDAs have started to use this type of reasonableness assessment to provide an understanding of how financially feasible the project would be without a pilot or with some other level of assistance. Would the project be financially feasible, and is it necessary and reasonable what is being requested? And so our analysis really looks to answer three main questions. Are the operating assumptions within norms for the region? Is the assistance necessary for the project to be financially feasible and therefore undertaken? And if the assistance is awarded, will the rate of return and assistance be similar to other market expectations for the region, within the region? So are they getting what they would typically look for with the assistance? So the analysis looked to understand, we looked at the different rent rates, compared them to average rent for other properties within Tompkins County. We also looked at three different scenarios: a no pilot scenario, the requested pilot scenario that was a 20-year pilot, and the standard pilot that has 10 years of a pilot and then full taxes after starting in year 11. So we looked at those three different scenarios. and the operating expectations that the developer provided us regarding revenue, expense, vacancy rates, to understand if everything was reasonable that they were estimating and how those different scenarios resulted in different levels of rate of return. So we first, we looked at their operating performance to compare their gross operating income, their vacancy rate, their operating expenses to typical similar data points on typical projects in the Northeast, and to determine whether they were within range. In all cases, they were within range. The vacancy rate was within range, and quite low actually. Well, it was 1%, but within range of the region. And I understand the vacancy rate is quite low in the area as well, so that makes sense. The operating expenses were within range. The overall operating income was slightly higher, but generally within range of the benchmark performance. So we looked at those different categories. We also looked at their financing plan, their expected interest rate, maturity in years, just to make sure their assumptions were within reason. All of that was within reason. And then we looked at 3 different data points related to the rate of return: the equity dividend rate, their cash flow, and their debt service coverage under these 3 scenarios: no pilot, the requested pilot, and the standard pilot. And under the requested pilot was required in order for them to have an overall positive cash flow over the life of the 20 years. Under all the scenarios, their equity dividend rate is quite low and is less than the benchmark, but we should remember that this is a very long phased project, and so by offering some kind of stability of the pilot over the phases of development, that creates that stability so that they would be able to the project would remain feasible and could be fully completed. Whereas if it were only the 10-year pilot, it increases a lot of instability to the project. So I did just want to make sure to make that note as well.
Okay. John.
So I think, there's a, I guess I'm curious about the level to which you paid any attention to the actual reasonableness of construction costs associated with this. I didn't see anything about that in the report. Did you just basically take their assumed total construction cost, and then you also assume that that's all phased in at the very beginning and you're servicing debt on it from day one in this analysis, right? So
that's correct. Okay. That is correct.
And I think, in my mind, I think that's the biggest problem with what we have in front of us right now. Like, that's obviously not what's going to happen. And so I don't know how we can really, ascertain the reasonableness of a project when, what we're being presented with is like assuming that they built this all tomorrow, when it's really being phased in over a decade with all sorts of uncertainty and other unbound variables. I also wonder if we've looked at all at the sort of the construction costs that are being suggested here and how they relate to like an adaptive reuse project versus a new ground up build. And I assume if you just took their numbers, you haven't done any of that kind of analysis here.
That's correct. That was not included here.
I think that's another area that I think is highly questionable, and I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, Deborah.
Yeah, my problem here cannot be addressed by your analysis, Rachel. That's not your fault. What I see here is a base pilot plus phased pilots that could stretch out the incentives that we're being asked to give for 35 years. And when you talk about assumptions and, are the operating assumptions within norms for the region? Are the construction assumptions within norms for the region? Is the assistance necessary for the project to be financially feasible over time and ensure a reasonable rate of return on the investment, yeah, you can do those analyses now. But are they going to be valid in 15 years? Are they going to be valid in 20 years? Are they going to be valid in 35 years? So I guess I might as well just throw this gauntlet down at this point, which is that I don't have a problem with the base pilot. I have a big problem with locking us in to the phased pilots for every sub-area of this project, including the ones that may not begin construction for another 12 or 15 years. When we don't know what market conditions and costs and expenses and the situation in the county and for the taxing jurisdictions is going to look like that far out. So, although I do understand why the developers need to have some stability to move forward with beginning this project, I think that that stability could be provided by a commitment on our part that we would consistently and periodically reevaluate what these sub-area projects need and commit that we would provide those incentives. But it would have to be reviewed periodically, I would say maybe every 5 years.
Okay. Just, I think we need to invite our guests up to have this conversation, but let's try to figure out or focus on this reasonability, the report before us, rather than figuring out where we go from there.
Well, the report before us may be valid now, but it ain't going to be valid in 35 years.
Okay. Jeff.
If we could just turn our attention to page 7, which is your operating performance. And actually, John, I think I'd already asked my question, one of my questions here. But just to confirm that, so your operating performance here, this is based on the complete project as it's done in the application, completely built out, and then in year 7, after it's been stabilized, under the enhanced pilot, you're saying it's about, call it $39,000 of cash flow, right? And then you're saying that in the standard pilot, they've got negative cash flow under a standard pilot then, correct?
That's correct.
And this is taking their assumptions of their current costs right now, and so it hasn't factored in any annual cost increase based on when they're building something 7 years from now, and or even rent increases or other expense increases, correct?
So it does account for rent, revenue and expenditure increases of, the applicant assumes gross revenue expenses will be escalated at 2% per year. So, so that does take into account annual revenue and expense increases of 2% per year.
Wait, both revenue and expense at 2%?
Correct.
So just so you're saying, so you're taking the base now of revenue, what they could get right now, their expenses right now, and then this is a model in 7 years, basically increasing both of those by 2%.
Correct.
Okay.
John.
Oh, I just wanted to make that point. I mean, there's, rent in this community has increased by and residential, 40% in the last 4 years. So I think that's another point and to add to Deborah's pile of points.
Yep, I can make a note.
Good pile.
Following up on Jeff's question on page 7, it looks like in year 7, it crosses over with the requested pilot, but it's nowhere near that for the standard pilot. What year would the standard pilot get to break even?
I don't believe it ever does. I can pull up my spreadsheet.
Okay. It sounds like it's way out. You don't need to. I'll move to page 8. In your sources of funds, you have other at $43 million. What is other?
I would have to go back to the developer on what that is.
Okay. All right.
Sorry, Rich, in the application, it was kind of like federal tax credits and various other grants and stuff that they were anticipating being
Okay,
received.
there's an item for low-income housing tax credits, so these would be some other?
Some other grants and
Okay.
stuff.
I mean, they just got Restore New York as an example for $2 million, right? So it's like those sorts of things. And I think this is an interesting, this project will qualify for probably many rounds because it's not one project, it's many projects. They could be in a Restore round basically every year. And at the scale of this project, they even qualify for the bigger Restore numbers. So things like that are one way that this project will almost certainly try to offset its construction expenses, which will change all the dynamics of these numbers pretty dramatically over time.
All right. And also on page 8, you used an interest rate of 6.5% within the range you'd identified. How did you arrive there?
That was provided by the developer as what their assumption, their assumed annual interest rate would be.
Okay.
That's about what you're at right now.
Okay, Jeff.
Rachel, just kind of you had mentioned in your opening there that you're starting to do more and more of these reasonableness studies.
Yeah.
And obviously, we've got our standard pilots 10 years. The requested is 20 years. So in these type of studies, what type of pilots have you seen? Have you seen greater than 20 years, greater than 10 years? Kind of what's the norm in this type of large project, I guess I would ask?
Yeah, in a large project, we do have many IDAs that are offering 20-year pilots, and there are a few that offer 30-year, but it's typically associated with some kind of affordable housing component where there's a 30-year pilot being considered. But yeah, 20, there are many IDAs that are offering 20-year pilots, pretty standard as part of their UTEP.
Okay. Further questions on the reasonability assessment? Doc?
I guess just a comment that, to incorporate everyone's points so far, it would just be a lot more useful to me, and I know it's not easy, but it would be more useful to me to analyze the reasonableness, feasibility of each individual project. The scale of the project is so massive and disparate in type. Even, to Deborah's point, even if the timeframes are off, and to John's point, even if we just make the assumption that they started today, at least that would give us some sense of which components are more challenging than others. And I don't know if that's feasible, but that's what would be more useful to me.
Yeah, I understand. Yep.
Okay. And Rachel, I think we all do recognize the difficulty of what you were called upon to do. So thank you. Ann?
Yeah.
Thank you. As far as office space, do you have figures for the current vacancy rate in the county?
Yes, I don't have them in front of me, but we did pull them as part of the office rent question, but an understanding that it was for the full county, the data that we were able to have available, and a likelihood that there would be some differences for this project in terms of its location and the desirability of it. So yes, we did pull some of that data. I just don't have it in front of me.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that we can have a revised version with some of these questions that we've asked. So for instance, this is one of those things that I would like in a revised version with the vacancy rate, because otherwise, are we not just pulling from other places, where because anecdotally I've been hearing that there's not a need for more office space, and in the last few years there was a large complex in the downtown area that had a lot of office space that changed because they had such difficulty having consistent tenants. They actually changed to a housing model. So just wondering about that.
Yep.
Okay. John?
I think if we get those numbers, we would also be helpful to understand not only the current vacancy rate, but also the scale of the current market. So, you've got 130,000 square feet of office. If the vacancy rate is 20%, and that's 20% of 1 million square feet, that's really different than 20% of 10 million square feet, for instance. I just don't know what that scale is that you're seeing in your numbers.
Yep, I can do that as well.
Okay. All right, I'd like to make sure we keep moving because we have our developers here and would love to get that conversation started. Is there anything further on the reports we want to ask about? All right, let's keep moving. And I'd invite our guests to come up to the table. And I know we have some people on screen too. I will be checking for raised hands. I'd very much like this to be a conversation. So if you have input you want to add, please chime in. And welcome.
Thank you. Is it worth introducing the team again?
Yes, please.
Everyone.
Yes, please.
So I'm Rob Lewis. I'm the development project manager on site, and with me is...
Hi, Melissa, newly last name Suhodolski. I was married since last time I was here, so wondering what is that name if you see it. Thank you. Thank you very much. One of the development partners with U.S. Ceiling.
And then online we have Nina Lynch.
Good morning.
We also have Sarah Barden, who works with me on site. Nina Lynch is a partner on the project. And then we have Brad Schwartz, who's our counsel for this. So. Oh, and David. I just saw the name. I missed it. But yes, David Lubin, another partner on the project, is online with us.
That's right. And well, thank you for coming back in. And I guess I just have a couple comments that I'd like to make to start. Because I've had a chance to talk with several of the other IDA members and get just a sense of where we're going. I think the consensus is this is a really exciting project that IDA members want to support, certainly as a clear majority. We want to see this happen. We want to help it happen. Where we'd love to have the conversation today is on this issue of how do we make these phases work where we would be granting approval for projects that might not start for over a decade. And I think the trepidation comes from the fact that as IDA members and as an IDA as a whole, we have the power to do this. Yet it probably isn't something where we should exercise that power. We have the right to do it, but we would be taking that decision from future IDAs and future taxpayers. And we need to make sure that when we're granting incentives that there's a need, and trying to determine whether that need will exist up to 15 years from now really scares us. So we understand your need for structure, for certainty, and the financing is in many ways a lot like the buildings themselves. They depend upon each other, and it's a whole project. But at the same time, we have, I think you used a term, John, the unbounded variables that we can't sit here and really know, like labor cost, construction cost, material cost, supply, what rent, everything. And we're trying to figure out a way that we can signal that the IDA supports this project. We want to support the structure, and we want to support it going forward, but we're going to depend on some back and forth as the project proceeds through the phases to give further approvals. I don't know if I overstepped on any of the other IDA members, but I'd love to give...
Much nicer way of saying what I'm thinking. Yeah. Thank you.
But Rob, I'd love to give you and your team a chance to respond to what I just said.
Sure. So obviously, we would like to have everything settled forever and ever today. But that's not, what we're going to do. And this sounds like there's a lot there to dig into. And some of that we're going to have to think about and get back to you. And some of that I'm sure that council will try to work through as that conversation continues. But I'll say just sort of as an initial reaction to, what Deborah Dawson voiced earlier and what you've just said, is that the certainty, as you pointed out, is very important. And while we, want to respect the bounds of what you feel you can do here, interjecting a risk stage at year 5 or year whatever is a real challenge. I mean, that's not trivial from our perspective. I don't have a yes or a no or an anything, on that today. But it's a serious issue from our perspective, and we're talking through. Brad might actually be able to speak to it more clearly than I can. I don't know if you had anything to add there, Brad.
Rob, so thank you. And just to introduce myself, Brad Schwartz from the law firm of Zarin and Steinmetz. Good to see you, meet you all. First, on behalf of our clients, I'd like to just say, Mr. Chairman, we appreciate your expression of support up front and indication of the goal to make this happen. And we certainly look forward to working with you and staff to achieve an outcome that works for all of us. We hear your concerns and your board's concerns about the unknowns going forward. And I'm confident, because we've done this before, we could work with your council and staff and your board to come up with certain parameters for those periodic check-ins and updates, which we have to do anyway. As you all know, there are certain reporting requirements that we have to do, and we could build in updates and certain parameters that could guide the project going forward so that all the items you mentioned, the interest rate, the construction costs, labor supply, materials, all those factors we could fold in to a pilot framework where the IDA retains some sort of handle on those, and we update the board as the project progresses, even construction progress, that we could build into a pilot structure to give you the comfort that the assistance is still needed, and it gives us the certainty that so long as there aren't major changes in all of these projections, that we can keep going forward with this financial assistance. And the details, I'm happy to discuss with Russ and hammer out and come back maybe as soon as next month with a proposal that obviously your board would have the final review and say, and I understand this will be an ongoing discussion. Rachel has some more homework to do to answer some questions, but I'm confident we could fold in all of your comments and concerns into a proposal, again, that works for everybody.
Okay. John.
I think perhaps helping us understand to some extent the actual structure of how you'll do things like obtain financing on this project, right? So it's as I understand it, you've got some big pre-development loan. Then essentially each time you do one of these sub-projects, you're probably going to go get financing for that sub-project, right? And there will be terms associated with that at that time. Is that accurate? I mean, you're not going out with a construction loan for $600 million today that phases in as you draw it over the next 15 years.
No, we are chasing pre-dev money, and there are challenges with pre-dev money right now,
no doubt.
As you could probably imagine. As you would also, I think, just correctly guessed, that pre-dev money gets taken out in stages, partially with construction loans for pieces as they enter construction, and we're able to get that financing. And that stability and being able to offer the stability and certainty to a pre-dev lender that as we pull a piece out of the pre-dev loan and finance it with construction loan and get something activated, that the tax bill doesn't go up on the rest of the parcels, actually super important to making that financing work.
Right.
Just as one key risk on that front.
But that's specifically the base pilot, not the sub-project pilots. And I think, the thing that I'm personally choking on here is actually really the sub-project pilots. It's not the base pilot, right? I think there are some important terms. I mentioned this in an email to my colleagues about, we want to make sure if you donate 60% of your dirt to the land trust and get it off the tax rolls, that doesn't change the numbers on the base pilot, for instance. Things, you can't develop some of the land. But these seem like relatively minor points that I think Brad could come up with some good language in consultation with our staff, as he described. But in my mind, we don't actually have a project. We have a series of an unknown number of projects that will happen over an unknown period of time. You're responding to commercial leasing interest about which things you're going to bite off within the chainway At the beginning, you're going to use different pilot programs for, the affordable housing components, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that, we simply must evaluate each of those things as they come in, following our UTEP at the time, understanding interest rates at the time, understanding what rent levels at the time are like, and all of these other factors. And it seems to me that is like the base pilot isn't the problem and gives you the certainty that you need. Well, these sort of sub-projects actually are treated as separate projects within the structure of our policies and the factors of the market at the time.
Okay.
Take care.
Deborah.
Yeah, I think that John and Rich have both more elegantly and diplomatically presented my problem. It's not the base pilot. I have no problem whatsoever with the base pilot. My problem is committing now to the terms of the phased pilots when those can be in effect, in 2050. That's, I guess personally, I shouldn't care, I'll be dead, but, and if Brad can work somehow with our council to figure out a way that we can revisit the exact percentage breakdowns of those phased pilots so that they are an accurate reflection of what the construction and financial and fiscal picture is at the time that they're granted, then I guess I'm fine with that. I just can't stomach being the person who sits here in 2024 and says, yeah, I'll commit to this thing in 2060. That just, I can't do it.
Okay.
And Deborah, we hear you, and that stomach ache is normal on all of these long-term, multi-phase, multi-year projects. And right, in each individual sub-area would have its own schedule. So the answer is yes. I think the details are probably out of the purview of this morning's discussion, but Russ and I could certainly come up with those parameters that I hope will make you all feel comfortable.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate the excitement that Rich expressed for the project. I think it's amazing, and I love that the people on the ground are two local leaders who I appreciate and respect. And I would reiterate that I also don't have a problem with the base pilot. To John's point, he said it very eloquently, I have a hard time getting away from thinking that each sub-project just needs its own application. But I'm open to listening to why that won't work. But that's where my head is right now.
Jeff.
So I really wanted to make sure before I kind of thought about a 20-year base pilot or whatever, I really wanted to understand a reasonableness assessment. So this was really helpful for me. And then my first question would be the Southworks, and I give you a lot of credit, operating performance. Why are you doing this project? Because the cash flows are, and look, I get there's all these assumptions and everything. So look, to me, that just reiterates you're putting a lot of skin in the game, you're putting a lot of risk. Mm-hmm. So I certainly give you a lot of credit for that. I think my thought, I know other people were more comfortable on the base pilot. I felt like a 15-year base pilot was a little bit long for me. I was kind of more along the lines of a 10-year. And the 20-year, again, I really wanted to understand a reasonableness test before I really thought about the 20-year, but I think based on this and other comments, I would be comfortable with a 20-year pilot.
The phased pilots or the base?
The 20-year phazed.
Right.
So
Thank you.
on that. The base, I'd be more comfortable on a 10-year, because look, to me, after 10 years, even if you're 75% of the way done, after 10 years, 25% on a base pilot, that's not going to have any economic impact really for you on that. So I guess, in my view, and just kind of from a public perception, I felt like a 10-year would be more comfortable for me. Now, I am a little concerned about when we talk about phases and what we're asking Southworks to do. Are we asking them to come back with an application every time they're doing another phase, which I think I would be a little uncomfortable with? I would certainly prefer to, instead of phases, be in years. So maybe we say, hey, you know, first 5 years, we grant them if people are comfortable, the 20-year within that first everything they do,
Yep.
we can do that in 20 years. Then we look at that and we say, okay, in 4 years, do they come back with a new application or do they come up with an update to us to say, okay, this is our first 5 years, this is how we've done, this is what our next 5 years are, and then let that IDA then take it from there and make determinations based on that.
Okay. Ann?
Yeah, I'm going back and forth, but I think this is a really helpful conversation that just thinking on the last thing that Russ was saying I'm sorry, Jeff, that the thinking about making sure that there's some way for other IDAs to be able to make decisions. Whereas if we're scheduling or granting something that's going to tie the hands of our future IDA, especially looking at the project where you're going to have to get funding and construction costs, as everybody said, there's going to be so many factors. There's going to be a lot of factors, you know, here at the county of what's going on, and, you know, with the economics of the country and in the world. So we don't know exactly what's going on, you know, in the future. I wish we could, you know, I want to provide certainty. I want to, you know, show the project and the community that we are supportive of the project. So just not able to make a commitment, of course, today, which we're not planning on doing anyway. But so getting more information, I would like to, like I said, I would like to see a revised analysis and then continue these conversations. So thank you.
Okay. John, did you have something?
Yeah, I mean, just as I've been listening to my colleagues' conversation, I think, you know, one of the things that is meaningful for me in considering this. So our base pilots, actually our standard pilot is 7 years. In the case of economic need, it's 10. And, you know, I think that that's actually like, right, like within the last few years, it's gone from being the case that some projects actually don't qualify under the economic need to being the case that we're not even sure that a 10-year pilot is adequate because construction costs have spiraled out of control and interest rates have spiraled out of control. You know, meanwhile, my earlier comment, the residential rent levels have drastically increased over the last few years. Commercial rent levels have not. They're actually pretty flat. And I think that, you know, in my mind, I could see some future board needing to grant you a 30 or even 40-year abatement in order to make a project work, or something with deeper levels at the beginning. And I just, like, I think that there's just, like, we don't know what variables we don't know about. So, like, Brad can try to bake all sorts of fun things into this based on our past experience, but nobody expected that the entire economy would be shut down in March of 2020, even in, like, February of 2020. And then we didn't expect that that would cause a drastic increase in the value of housing, you know, which, I mean, like, in March, I remember thinking, like, oh, crap, I just bought a house last month, and I probably drastically overpaid for it, and now it's worth about double what I paid. So, you know, I think that there's, like, just too much uncertainty in the future to really do this effectively, and I think we need to see at each point where a new project is financed, a new application with actual terms based on what that project will do, similar to any other project we might consider. So, okay.
So Donald Rumsfeld's known unknowns and unknown unknowns, and here we are.
Yeah. Jeff, and then I'll take a turn.
So I did want to add something in here because I think it feels like it would be important for the Ithaca community, and maybe it doesn't need to be documented, but I go back to the housing, 915 units, so that equates to 20%, 183 affordable housing units. And I know the plan may be to sell off some of those market rate units and everything. So I just want us to make sure, and I believe in Heather's presentation, you had mentioned that that the affordable units wouldn't be affected by that. So in other words, if you sold 100 units and now it wouldn't drop the affordable requirement by 20 units. I think I would just want to make sure that we've got that documented in the agreement, that at the end of the day, you're really committing to 183 affordable units, whether you decide to sell off some other units or not and put them on the rolls.
That's the applicant's intention.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. All right, I'll jump in with a turn here. Did I mention we really want to see this project happen? And we want to help it happen. And I think you understand the struggles we're having in how to provide that support. Personally, I'm okay with the total incentive amount. I'm okay with the base, use of a base. I'd like to see it over 10 years. I think I agree with Jeff. It's cleaner if that can be done. I like the use of phases and how they come in. I like the idea of this IDA stretching a bit and giving you blanket approval for a 5-year period to go. It's like a meta incentive to saddle up and start building stuff. Because ultimately we want the whole thing done. We don't want some of it done. And particularly the chainway, I think, is such an innovative, great part of the project. Personally, I'd love to see that done. And all the incentives we can provide to go quickly and to move and to keep, not too fast, but move, I think we want to do. And to give you the certainty that over a 5-year period the IDA has approved, maybe we can do that. I think we can also provide you some structure in terms of saying, yes, we will approve phases and maybe put some parameters around future IDAs, how they consider the different phases after the 5-year period. I don't know quite how we do that, but to give you some certainty that future IDAs will be working to help the long-term vision of it's all built. And I'd also say, with all these uncertainties, I'm not opposed to you coming in 10 years from now and saying we need more incentive. You don't know what the future is either. If our community goal is to get it done, it might not be the numbers we've been talking about. It might be more than that. So just a couple other items. I don't have an objection to sale of housing elements if you need to do that to make the whole project work, which is a little different than what we typically consider, and use of a for-profit affordable housing business to assist if you need to do that. I don't have a problem with that. And I lost track. I think it was Deborah.
Yeah. I appreciate what you're saying, Rich and Jeff, but I think if we're going to create some level of uncertainty because we're going to say time limit or sub-area project limit, the phased pilots that we're offering, we ought to stick with the 15-year base pilot because that does, for one thing, signify our commitment to seeing this project go forward, and it gives the developer a little more certainty within that.
You might be right.
Uncertainty.
You might be right.
And I do want to point out that it may very well be that the incentives will increase over time because we just don't know what the situation's going to be, but it seems like over the past, I don't know how many years, the trend for everything is more expensive. So, yeah, my concerns are not about the value of the project. And like everybody says, we all want to see this happen. I just can't get behind making a decision today that's going to have that kind of fiscal impact on taxing jurisdictions everywhere in our county 35 years from now.
Okay. John.
Yeah, I kind of like where you're going with this, Rich, and I might suggest a couple of things. One is that, we probably put some parameters, if we're going to do a 15-year base pilot and lock in 5 years or something as a suggestion, put some parameters around it. In my mind, I think the big win here is the housing. I look at the job creation stuff that we're doing, and it's important work, but it's also, it's like, where will these people live? And that's our big problem in this community. And if we create a bunch of jobs and then don't also create a bunch of housing, we're actually going to make our county a worse place to live than it is right now. It will make it harder for the people who are already living at 50% or more of their income to find places to live. So I'd personally like to see a lot of the housing work front-loaded, and would feel like we should have some, if you're going to have a base pilot for 10 or 15 years, some milestones of like, that only continues to be the case if you're actually delivering something. You can't sit on it for 15 years and do nothing and then be like, never mind, and sell the land for $100 million. I mean, obviously that's a ridiculous scenario, but I mean,
yes.
It's not, I mean, based on values of land in nearby locations, it's not actually that far out of scale. So, I think we should consider, and, I think that's part of understanding from Camoin the size of the market and the vacancy rates and things like that by the different sub-areas of what they're planning to create, understanding where the actual demand is and what we're creating that's additive to the community rather than what we're creating that's going to take away from other parts of the community, which I think some of this very much will. Now, not that that's necessarily a bad thing. You're going to create a nice product that people want, but, what really is the big net benefit? Okay, Rob,
Well, there's been a lot. It's nice that it's clear that you have spent so much effort really thinking through the project and what is appropriate. It's clear that there's been a level of thought and conversation between this meeting and the one prior and probably before that, and I do really appreciate that. There's a lot that I really appreciate in this conversation in terms of the expressions of support, the willing to be flexible beyond normal policy, the willingness to work with us towards finding the next path forward, like all that I very much appreciate. And then there's also these interjection of risk steps from our perspective that feel probably like de-risking steps from a political risk on your end perspective, that we just have to work through, and we're gonna do that work. There's probably better ways to sum this up, either from Brad or from Nina, but I'll say for my piece, I do really appreciate the thought, and I think it's clear to us what the work is we need to do next.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I do want to say how much I appreciate the board's expression of support and interest and willingness to discuss, something that is unusual and obviously feels a bit uncomfortable. So we hear you, and we think, the next steps that we outlined probably make the most sense, which is for our attorney, Brad Schwartz, and to work with the board's attorney and take into consideration both what they've heard today, their experience from other areas, and come back with a proposal that we'll then discuss in more detail. In addition to, of course, the additional analysis you've requested of Camoin. Very much appreciate your time today and look forward to continuing the discussion.
Okay. Russ and Steve, I don't want to put you on the spot, but let me put you on the spot.
No problem.
What do you think?
I agree with everything the board's concerned, for lack of a better way of putting it. And, on projects of this magnitude, which are few and far between in New York State, typically they're alternative energy projects where it's a little bit more cut and dried. You know what the project's going to be. You know what the CapEx is going to be. It's going to be built in 3 to 5 years. This has a lot of components and moving parts, as we all know. Typically in a project like this, the applicant and staff and council will come together and take what the board has said, digest it, and try to come back with a proposal, which we're happy to do if that's the board's pleasure.
Well, let me go to the board then. I like Brad's proposal, and it sounds like our council's ready to go.
Rich, Sarah's on the side.
Okay. Yeah, Sarah, jump in.
Oh, thanks. I just wanted to piggyback on two things that were expressed by you all, one of them being a prioritization of the housing, the other being the prioritization of the commercial. And I just wanted to note that we actively have projects going on in both of those realms and that they're going to continue to be developed in tandem. So you don't have to choose between those two elements happening, that we are pushing them forward simultaneously. And the other thing that I just wanted to mention was we're having a community open house this Wednesday from 3 to 7. And so anyone who hasn't been to the site yet and hasn't had a chance to tour it or would like to talk to us more in depth as you're, kind of considering all of these elements, we'd love to have you join us. That invitation is open to anyone in the community, and we'll have a number of our partners who are actively engaged in the project and folks who've been working with us for a very long time on this project there, so you can get multiple perspectives as you make your decisions.
Yes.
Yes, I think you asked a rhetorical question, Jeff, but I really, in terms of why are we doing this, this is such, as we've talked about, a transformational project and opportunity. And I think that the team, the collective team that's assembled to work on this project is as significant as the opportunity of the project because of our track record in doing challenging work in other communities and also for our commitment to this community. And so I just really want to underscore the importance of the timing of this team coming together for this project as a significant added value to the community that we are fully committed to do the hard work to make it happen.
Okay, thank you. And Sarah, thank you for the scheduling the open house. That's a nice opportunity. My question to the IDA members, does this make sense to you that our councils work together to try to put together a structure we can then consider? Yes, I'm seeing all nodded heads. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. This has been, I think, a really productive conversation, helpful, and we move forward from here. Anything further?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Further business, I think we had a consideration of an executive session. Oh, actually, before we get there, John.
Yeah, so I think this won't come as a surprise to anyone, but the time has come for me to resign my position here on the IDA board. I have a project in the works that will need assistance, and this creates a prohibited conflict under New York state law, so I can no longer continue to serve. So effectively, by the end of the month, I will be resigning my position. I'm going to provide a letter to Rich and to the county legislature. It has been a real honor to serve here. I feel like we've done some really good work in my time here, and I think that I'm a little sad to be going while this project is in consideration. I was excited to be working on this. You'll probably hear from me at least a little bit as you continue to consider, but I won't get the vote on the final outcome. So just wanted to put that out there, yeah, thank you all for continuing.
We'll look forward to your public comments, John.
John, I do want to say we have appreciated your steady and hard work on behalf of the IDA. You've certainly brought a very unique perspective, a lot of experience, and passion to these meetings, and you've recognized the importance of what we're doing here. You will be missed. And again, thank you for your service. It matters. So wish you well.
Agreed. I think your experience and your creative thinking has been an asset to this board and to me personally for many years. So thank you.
We'll miss your insights, John. Thank you.
Okay. Do I have a motion to go into executive session?
For what purpose?
For personnel. Deborah moves. Duck seconds. All those in favor? Right. So we're going to recess while we go into executive session.
Okay.
And
Yes, we're going to need to keep Ann on screen if we can. And thank you, everybody, for coming.
Do we want to ask him?